Roughly 1 in 20 people have zero inner monologue. No voice, no narration, just silence where their thoughts are supposed to sound like words. And until a few years ago, science had no idea this was even possible. Say something in your head right now. Anything. Notice the voice that just said it. That voice feels like the most obvious thing in the world. It's just you, thinking. It's been there since before you can remember, so you've never really questioned it. Why would you question the one thing that's always been on? Here's the strange part, though. For most of history, scientists just assumed everyone's mind worked the same way. Words in, words out. Thinking equals talking to yourself. That assumption survived right up until psychologists actually started asking people what was happening inside their heads, moment by moment, in real time. And the second they did, the assumption fell apart. In 2011, a psychologist named Russell Hurlburt at the University of Nevada built something called descriptive experience sampling. The idea was almost embarrassingly simple. Give someone a small beeper. Let it go off at random points during the day. The second it beeps, they stop and write down exactly what was happening in their mind 1 second earlier. Not a summary. Not their best guess. The raw thing itself, caught in the act. Hurlburt expected the data to confirm what everyone already believed. Instead, it didn't. Inner speech, that actual experience of hearing words in your head, only showed up in roughly a quarter of the moments people caught themselves in. The rest of the time, people reported something else. Images. Pure feeling with no words attached to it. Physical sensations, or just nothing they could put into language at all. So the voice in your head isn't running nonstop, even though it feels like it is. It clicks on and off all day long, and you never notice the gaps, because there's nothing there to remember. Your brain just quietly papers over the silence and hands you the illusion of one continuous narrator. That's strange enough on its own, but it's only the first layer. Because in 2020, Hurlburt teamed up with a neuroscientist named Charles Fernyhough and pushed the question further. They didn't just want to know how often inner speech happens. They wanted to know who has it at all. Using the same beeper method on a much bigger group, they found something almost nobody had documented before. A small slice of people every time they got beeped never reported hearing words in their head. Not less often, never. Not once across hundreds of samples. These people had spent their whole lives quietly assuming everyone else thought the way they did. Most of them only found out otherwise by accident, in some random conversation when a friend casually mentioned hearing themselves think, and they realized, wait, that's not a figure of speech. That's literally a thing that happens to other people, and it had never once happened to them. Researchers now think this applies to somewhere between 5 and 10% of people. No inner monologue, at all. And the number isn't even fixed across cultures. Some researchers studying bilingual people have noticed their inner speech sometimes switches languages mid-thought or drops out entirely during certain tasks more often than it does for monolingual speakers. Almost like the inner voice isn't hardwired to one language at all, more like a tool the brain picks up and puts down depending on what it actually needs. And here's the part that's genuinely hard to wrap your head around. The people with no inner voice aren't missing anything. They're not less intelligent, less self-aware, or worse at complex thought. Plenty of them are writers, scientists, philosophers even, people whose entire job is thinking clearly. So whatever that voice is doing for the rest of us, it clearly isn't required for thinking itself. It's something else, something your brain happens to build, or doesn't. Which raises the obvious question, if thought doesn't need language, what's the voice actually for? This is where it gets stranger. Fernyhough has spent years chasing that question, and his answer traces back to something every single one of us did as a kid, long before we could talk to ourselves silently. Go watch a 5-year-old playing alone sometime. They narrate everything out loud. Now the truck goes here, now it crashes. A developmental psychologist named Lev Vygotsky noticed this almost 100 years ago and called it private speech. Kids talk out loud because they haven't built the machinery yet to do that thinking silently. The talking isn't some cute extra, it is the thinking, just happening out in the open because there's no other way for it to happen yet. Somewhere between 6 and 10 years old, for most kids, that narration starts moving inward. The words don't go anywhere. They just stop being spoken and start being heard, instead, inside your own head. So that inner voice you've had since basically forever, it's actually one of the more recent additions to who you are. It's just the leftover machinery of a 5-year-old talking to their toys, quietly relocated somewhere you can't see it anymore. But for some kids, Fernyhough's research suggests that move inward takes a different path. Instead of fully converting into words you can hear, the thinking stays more compressed, more wordless, arguably even faster, because it skips the step of packaging every idea into a full sentence before you can use it. That's the version that ends up belonging to the 5 to 10% of adults walking around with no inner voice at all. Same starting point for everyone. Two completely different roads out of it. And the fork happens so early, neither version of you was even old enough to notice. But there's one more layer underneath all of this, and it might be the strangest one yet. Inner speech doesn't just sit there narrating your thoughts like subtitles on a movie. Brain scans show it actually lights up the same regions involved in physically speaking, including the motor areas that would move your mouth if you said the words out loud, and a separate system whose entire job is figuring out whether a sound came from you or from someone else. That system exists for a reason. Every time you speak, your brain has to instantly tell your own voice apart from a stranger's, even though both arrive as the exact same kind of sound wave. It does this so fast, so automatically, that you've genuinely never had to think about it once in your life. Here's where it gets unsettling. Researchers studying auditory hallucinations have found that sometimes this exact monitoring system misfires. The brain generates inner speech completely normally, the same process producing your everyday thoughts right now, but fails to tag it as self-generated. What you get is a voice that feels like it's coming from outside you, even though it never left your own skull. The people experiencing this aren't hallucinating some brand new voice out of nowhere. They're hearing the exact same machinery you use every day. It's just missing the one tiny signature that would normally mark it as theirs. So the difference between your inner voice and a hallucinated one isn't what's being generated at all. It's whether your brain correctly labels it as yours, which leads to a genuinely uncomfortable question. That voice you've trusted your entire life, the one that feels unmistakably like you, the one you'd swear in court belongs to nobody else, is only you because some labeling system in your brain says it is. Nudge that one mechanism, even slightly, and the exact same signal, generated by the exact same neurons, suddenly feels like it belongs to a complete stranger. So here's what's actually going on every time you talk to yourself in your head. It isn't a constant stream, even though it feels like one. It switches on and off all day, and your memory just quietly throws away the gaps. It isn't required for thought, because somewhere between 1 in 10 and 1 in 20 people think in pure image and concept with 0 words, and think just as clearly as you do. It's leftover scaffolding from a 5-year-old narrating their own toys out loud, internalized so thoroughly you forgot it was ever spoken aloud in the first place. And the only reason it feels like you, instead of someone speaking inside your own skull, is one fragile labeling system tagging the signal as yours. A system that can misfire, and when it does, turns your own thoughts into a stranger's voice. You didn't choose this voice. You built it automatically as a kid, the same way you built the ability to walk without ever consciously deciding to. And somewhere along the way, you started mistaking it for the one part of yourself you'd never have to question. You don't.